Let's bring in Paul Alake, Paul Alaje, who is Chief Economist at SPM Professionals. Thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. Mr. Alaje, the president is saying that our economy is stabilizing, growth at 3.98%. Inflation came down this month to 14%. We're looking at reserves at a 7-year high. From an economist lens, are these structural gains or you think they're temporary relief?
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me. Clearly speaking, the president has performed the ritual of presenting the budget above 58 billion, trillion naira. And we have over 30 trillion naira in expected revenue. To a large extent, it's a ritual that the president has performed. He has identified key projects, which include those in infrastructure, education, health, and so on and so forth, as part of the project that he has presented to the assembly. Now, looking at the budget carefully, we know that the president has divided these in some parts of capital expenditure and that of recurrent expenditure from what he presented to the assembly today. Now, it's important at what the parameter or the background of this budget, what it means before we look at whether it is achievable or unachievable. We have seen that government is projecting the price for crude at 64.8 naira based on the budget that is projected for 2026. And we have also seen that government is hoping exchange rate will remain 512 in 2026. These are two key parameters. As you know, among other things, the Nigerian budget always have this parameter as what is used next year. So whether this will be economic gain or not, we need to look at by how much are we expected to perform in the recent time. $1 billion. This is that we have done. But the real problem is, if you look at revenue of only 34.3 trillion naira, as against 58.18 trillion naira expenditure. The question is, where would we get 24 trillion naira from? 24 trillion naira is huge. In terms of debt, it might place us on the risk side. So while I commend the president for something, we also need to note that this budget is also giving us the major gap between the expected expenditure and that of revenue is huge. I don't know, if time permits, we can look at other critical parts of this budget and we can analyze them accordingly.
We'll get there, but I wanted us to just go through some of the things we've seen play out in the outgoing year. Inflation is moderating, but many Nigerians still talk about food prices and how unbearable they still are. How long before this disinflation actually translates into relief at the market level? Because it's on this premise that the 2026 spending plan is now built on.
Really cannot say much when you want to check the impact of inflation on the reality. I have said it, and I believe that I've spoken to one of your best, your colleague, by the way, Mr. Tolu Gunjobi. And of course, I've also spoken with some of your colleagues at this hour, mentioning that when it comes to inflation, what the Bureau of Statistics is reporting, it's change of base year. So there have been a number of factors that contributed to reducing inflation, which include exchange rate, which include improved foreign reserve. But this changes cannot account for a drop in 20%. At best, you will say we have 6% reduction in inflation if you are to report it based on other factors apart from base year. But base year alone accounts for the 14%. And the numbers are there. You can run the econometrics model to check what accounted for this reduction in inflation. It does not mean Bureau of Statistics is completely wrong for adopting a new base year. The worry is that that method is adopted at a time when there is general economic concern in the country. Therefore, what we need to note is that even though the number appear as though it has reduced or it has fallen, in the real sense, in economics, it's a period of outlier. We cannot call it increased number or reduced number until, I mark my word, April 2026. That is when you'll be comparing a given base year with the same given base year. Any other number we are comparing before that time, honestly and sincerely, it will be difficult for you as a brilliant journalist to explain to people listening to you, or for me as an economist to explain to those who I'm trying to educate that inflation is coming down. Because when you go to the market, yes, some food prices reduced, like that of rice, but house rent generally is high, cost of transport remains high, cost of ticket remains high, sachet of pure water remains high, cost of bread remains high, etc., etc. Why? Because according to the Bureau of Statistics, manufacturing, which of course is a key driver of growth for a nation with high population, only contributed 1.25% to the economic growth year on year. And that figure is purely from the National Bureau of Statistics. So it's important for us to take note of those key areas.
Absolutely. But when you look at the figures in the 2026 appropriation bill, government expects 34.33 trillion naira in revenue, despite achieving only 61% of its revenue target by third quarter of this year. Do you think this projection is realistic or overly optimistic?
I think it's different fiscal environment next year, and then the expectation of government regarding crude has largely moderated. Before now, we try to be ambitious by saying we will make it $100, $75, $70. I think with what we've done is as largely moderated. I'm not sure if National Assembly will not jack that up back to about 67 because of other areas of interest that might have not been captured, especially as it affects the Assembly under the current expenditure. Other community, or what they call it now, constituency project. So if National Assembly will not jack that up, but it's important for us to look at average in the last 1 year, in the last 2 years, before that increase is made. But I am very confident that we will do far more than 51% this year in terms of revenue. But my challenge is that if you and I know that meeting revenue targets, which I said last year, that when President presented, I mentioned that this budget is ambitious, and I am definitely confident that we can never meet that revenue target. The report is in the public domain. For third quarter, we made only 51%. What happens to the gap of 49% that has not been met? If we have spent the money only one direction, we have gone borrowing. We have gone to borrow such money because government must continue. Government is a continuum. The president wants to implement projects, salaries has to be paid, etc., etc. And that is why finding innovative way. It's important for us to add to the current energy effort coming from very important agencies of government, like what FRS is doing, trying to gather revenue for the nation, immigration, custom, and all of those things. All they are doing, we need to find other innovative revenue or revenue sources to improve the quality of revenue of our nation, because the part we must avoid, except and unless, is for development expenditure, that is capital expenditure. But the development part of capital expenditure, honestly, borrowing will not be what I will not even recommend borrowing for anything that has to do with recurrent expenditure, other than core capital, developmental capital, which includes putting money in rails, putting money in roads, putting money in housing, and when I say housing, sustainable housing for that matter, or building money to support manufacturing and industry. Those are areas we should consider if we must borrow at all this moment today.
But the thing is, we have already borrowed enough. Let's talk about debt sustainability. 15.52 trillion naira for debt service and nearly half of the projected revenue for 2026. At what point does debt servicing crowd out development, and where do you think the National Assembly must begin to draw the line, if we intend to borrow more in the new year?
Okay, so here is it. It's not just the National Assembly. Executive also needs to draw the line. I'll tell you what it was. Before now, we're doing 98% of revenue. Mark you, with what you have said, it's important we look at it very carefully. My worry is that if you have only done 51% and we're looking at near half for next year, we can assume that if you use the same energy this year, next year, debt service to revenue may eventually go to above 80%, knowing fully well that we did not meet the target, or it may go to about over 80%. I think that would be a charitable place to live in. We're coming from 98%. This administration did best possible to reduce 98% to around 70%. Now it's increasing, it's growing back to around 70, 80, 90%. It is therefore imperative and important for those in authority to know that sustainability of debt, which of course is debt service and offshoot of it, is important for consideration. What does economists say when it comes to borrowing? We should never do more than 33.3%. That is 1/3. That is a moderate place to be. 1/3 of all our revenue. That is 1/3, then the remaining 2/3, or 66.6%, can be used for both capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. But when you look at debt service at 15.25 trillion, compare that with our expected revenue of 34.33 trillion, you know that we have a lot more to desire. Now, if the budget will play out like this, then we might say that we do not have so much problem. But you know as much as I do that in the last 7 years, 8 years, or 10 years, we find it very challenging to meet up with our revenue target. What we have in fact met was to even upshoot our expenditure by taking supplementary budgets to the assembly to pass. What happens when you pass supplementary budget and you don't have revenue to finance it? You are technically increasing your expenditure, whether capital or recurrent. So what must we do not to get to the point where debt service will go beyond 50, 51, 52% that is projected by government, to eventually getting it to about 70, 80, 90%. And I hope that we don't get there in the coming period.
Interesting. We're also looking at a 23.85 trillion naira deficit, even at 4.28% of our GDP is still massive, right? How do you think Nigerians should interpret this fiscal responsibility or unavoidable borrowing, if I can put it that way?
Honestly, you are very right when you say that capital expenditure, for me, capital component, we must spend on it. So what must we do? I know that, you see, this will not come in immediate term. When you say immediate term, it will not come. But in the meantime, that is when it will come. And I think those helping His Excellency, Mr. President, to plan his MTEF, they need to do more justice. I'm not saying they're not doing anything, but I'm saying they need to do more justice. In 2024, the president had the privilege of presenting his budget. My question is, are we still following his MTEF 2024? Because his MTEF 2024 will give us 2025 budget, 2026 budget, and 2027 budget. It is at that moment we should have peeked into the future. What inflation will be, what unemployment will be, what exchange rate will be, what capital expenditure we need to expend on, and so on and so forth. So that when they meet the assembly for borrowing, there are clear projects we intend to achieve. And I'm saying this because over the years, and I mean over 20-something years that I've studied this Nigerian economy, it's challenging to match what's it called now? MTEF. That's a medium-term expenditure framework, and FSP, to match them with subsequent budget. It's as though we prepare our MTEF as if the interest is just immediate for that year's budget. Once it changes, we quickly look for it besides the rolling plan and prepare sometimes an entirely new MTEF without allowing subsequent budget to take their life with minute difference in MTEF. And that is why sometimes it's as though most presidents who give their time and all of those, they just come to present the paper. The question is, are we checking if there is a connection with this budget and the previous MTF, or do we just make adjustment to the previous MTF? Over and over again, this remains a challenge that we have seen in this in presentation of paper and also in following the same. If you have a budget, for instance, which I of course think the media should follow very carefully, and my friends, my colleagues in the civil society, we need to watch very carefully the MTF that has been presented for 2026-2028. In this MTF, subsequent budget will then keep coming out from it. When we say we want to embark on some capital expenditure, this capital expenditure we're embarking on, is it just for the presentation of this year's budget or subsequent budget? And we should tie this to some goals. Why do we want to invest on education? Why do we want to invest on defense and security? Performance measurement of budget will not just be because money has been released. It will now go beyond that. It will now go to, we said we want to counter terrorists or insurgents in critical area, let's say 3, 4, 5 states. How many have we done? If we have done 2 or 3 out of 4, which area, what of what we wrote in? If not, we will notice that as a nation, we will keep, in fact, we will keep spending new monies, and we want, at best, our books may look good, but when you go out to poll opinions of Nigeria, the difference may be clear.
I hear you clearly. Talking about capital expenditure, Mr. Laje, it jumped to 26.08 trillion, even though only 17% of this year's capital budget had been released by third quarter. So I understand when Nigerians talk about the confidence or concerns that next year will be any different. But let's look at some parameters here quickly because of time. The budget is built on 1,400 naira to $1. If FX volatility returns, how exposed is this budget?
I didn't get the question, sir.
I'm saying if our FX volatility returns, you know, the benchmark is 1,400 naira per dollar, to $1. How exposed would you say this budget is?
Well, I must say that central bank have done everything possible to manage the volatility in FX window, and I must give credit to the team, Mr. Cardoso and his team. When they were not doing correctly, I was at the forefront of criticism to say that, listen, it's not an offense, it's not a monetary offense to adopt managed flows. Today, central bank has since adopted managed flows, not fixing the rate, which is appreciable, but it's also not pure floating, because in the real sense of it, there is no African nation that can survive that absolute flotation. It's not possible. But perhaps, according to some people, they want Naira to find its level. So where we are today, it's a function of inflows. And I can tell you that we have started seeing that. And that is why the issue of Dangote, honestly, I cannot discuss it without making the issue of Dangote refinery to the fore. If Nigeria jokes with that refinery, I'm telling you, the impact will be devastating. It will be. Look at this. What the only thing that changed in terms of the how rapid we're able to grow our reserve, micro speaking, is that refinery. Central Bank did a lot of policy, no doubt. No doubt. But it came at a time when Dangote can save us, at least we all agree, both the regulator side and the regulated side, that 50% of local consumption is now being shouldered by Dangote refinery. It's okay. Even though Dangote says more, but regulator says 50%. Do you know what that 50% means? If you had imported them, it's a lot. That is why, to my mind, it's important for us to note that once that refinery runs and we can reduce our imports, then we can also export or the other to export. Volatility, except there is a global shock, may not be expected. However, if we do not go by that way and we feel that, oh, where we may have a challenge, it's not because of industry. That is what I didn't see in this budget.
I hear you, Mr. Laje. We have completely run out of time. I understand we have to go now. If you can, in a sentence, because Nigerians are a little bit agitated and they just want some form of clarity as regards to the way you're reading this spending proposal. In one sentence, does this budget mark the turning point from all of the reform spin we've seen in the past years? Or do you think the hardest part still lie ahead of us in the new year?
Well, I do not see a difference from this budget and the previous budget that we have passed. There are several budgets that we have passed, and I keep saying it for some years now. We can give it